Hello and welcome to the Flutter Factory. This is part 5 of my series where we make an entire app from scratch. In the last video, we talked about how to read data from a Firestore database and display it in a list. So we displayed a list of videos from Firestore. But in this video, we're going to make a slight change to how we actually retrieve the data. And we're going to actually use the YouTube API to retrieve videos from my specific YouTube channel for Flutter. So as you can see, we have our home screen here from part 4. This is the Firestore data that's in the backend. So as you can see here, we have our Firestore data here. Let's go to the pub spec. So before the video, I installed 2 libraries that I know I'm going to be using for this video. So I added Dio and Logger. So Dio I'm using for the REST API, and for Logger, I'm using that just to log data, just to make it look a little bit better in the console. So before we start coding, I will show you how the API looks. So this is the YouTube data API. This is a very useful API if you want to use any type of YouTube content in your apps. So you have your channels, playlist, subscriptions, thumbnails, etc. So what I want to do is I want to actually get all of the Flutter videos from my channel. You have different options here. I already know what the response looks like, so I'm going to choose snippet. The snippet gives you the basic information about a video and playlist, like the titles, description, thumbnails, etc. So I'm going to use the snippet and the playlist ID here. So if you want the playlist ID, you would go to a channel and go to playlist. And I just want the playlist for the Flutter videos. So that'll be this here. So I have this as the ID. And the snippet, I'm just going to have, for the part, I'll just have the snippet. And this is the base URL. So we have 3 things so far that we need. We have the base URL, the part type that we want, and the playlist ID. Okay, so the last thing we need is the API key. So to get a API key for YouTube or any other Google service, you would go to the Google Cloud platform. And I already created a channel called YouTube channel. So if you don't have a project already, just go to new project and it will walk you through all the steps here. But if you already have a channel, so go to your channel and you can go back here. Let's see, should be an API services. And then you can go to enable APIs and services. And then you can type in like different services that you want to enable. So view all. Then I went to YouTube data API and it'll walk you through how to create an API key. I'm not going to go through all that stuff right now because I want to focus on the app that we're building now. Okay, so I'll show you how to use all this stuff in your app to actually get data from the YouTube API. Okay, so I've already installed a Dio here, right? So I'm not going to talk much about Dio. If you want a more in-depth look at Dio, I did a video on that when I talked about REST APIs. And you can also use the HTTP package too, but I prefer Dio myself. Okay, so up here, we had our API coming from Firebase before, right? So we can keep this here, but for now, I want to create 2 other folders. So under data, we have API. So I want to split these into 2 folders. So I'm going to say new folder, and I'm going to say Firebase API, and that should be, yeah. And then I'm going to say YouTube API. How you do this is up to you, but I'm just going to break this up into 2 different folders. So I'm going to put this one into the Firebase API, and this one into the YouTube API. So the Firebase API, I'm just going to keep it there. But for the YouTube API now we want to create an actual client. So I created this in the first or second video, but now we're actually going to use it because we need to set up a client using Dio. So instead of just having a class here, I'm going to actually return a Dio instance here. So Dio. And then this will just be a function client. Okay, make this a function. Now we want to import our Dio here. Okay, so now we want to set up our Dio. So Again, I'm not going to go too much into DO, but I'm just going to show you how to create a basic client with it. So I'm going to say var DO equals a new DO instance. Okay, and now I'm going to configure our DO instance. So down here, I'm going to say DO, and then you have a few different options. So I'm going to say options. I'm going to configure the base URL. So as I said before, the base URL is part of this here. So just copy this here. And I'm going to put this into here. Quotes. Okay, and because this is just the base URL, I don't want this to be specific to playlist items yet. So I'm going to get rid of everything after v30 here. Okay. And you'll see why I'm doing this later on. So down here. Okay, down here I'm going to add a optional timeout here. So do.options.timeout. I'm going to say connect timeout. Just set it to 10,000 here. Okay, and down here, I want to add some interceptors. Interceptors are callbacks that intercept various operations of your REST API calls. So do.interceptors.add. Okay, so in here, this takes in an interceptor element. So I'm going to create a interceptor wrapper. That's the basic class that you use for adding interceptors here. Let's go up here and I want to create a new logger instance. So logger equals logger. So I'm not going to talk about this library too much either. It just lets you log stuff to your console in a prettier format. So let's go down here now. And now I want to create interceptors for our DO client. So there's three types of interceptors that you'll probably be using for your app. So they're request, response, and error. So if you look into here, you see request, response interceptor handler, and error interceptor handler. So down here, we'll say void request interceptor. And what do we want to pass into here and return here? So let's go up here and you can actually just put these as parameters here. So let's do on request. And what does this take in? It takes in request options and a request interceptor handler. So you have to pass these two parameters to this function. We pass in request options, so request options, and request interceptor handler, and we could just call it handler. Okay, so we're passing those two things in here. And now I actually want to log what this is. So I want to log what the options are. So let's go down here and we can say logger. And you have a lot of different options here. You can say D for debug, error, info, etc. We're going to say debug. So .d, and then we just pass in the options here. You can pass in like whatever you want to. You can say options.data, etc. Yeah, let's just do option. Okay, and now you actually need to return something from here. So if I just put this in here like this, you want to pass in the options and the handler here. So we can have a arrow function that returns that function. So request interceptor. Let's put this here. Then we pass in the options and handler. Okay, parentheses here. And in here, we also want to tell the request to continue when this happens. So down here, I'm going to say handler. So we have our handler and say dot next, and then you pass in the options. So it will continue the process as normal. So you can see here, continues to call the next request. So we want to do something similar down here with the other two. So let's go copy, paste this, and then I'm going to say response interceptor. And then this will be not the request options, but just a response. Okay, and let's name this response. And down here, I want to focus on the actual data. So I'm going to say response.data. And for the handler.next, I'm going to pass in the response here. Okay, and you can see that we have this error here. That's because it expects a response interceptor handler, not request here. So let's say response interceptor handler. So we're good here. Let's put these on a different line here. And we need one more for the error. So copy, paste. So for the error, so first let's actually go up here and we'll pass in the response here. So we'll do on response, options handler, and response interceptor. Options. Okay, there we go. So we have one more, and that is the on error. So the on error is a bit different. We'll pass in a deal error and an error interceptor handler. So down here, it'll be a deal error, and error interceptor handler. So down here, we can log either the error, or we can say error dot, let's say dot error, let's say error dot, message. And then for the handler dot next, we'll just pass in the error here. And we should change this to error. Okay. So I think we're good here. So on error, we take the error and the handler here. And then we return the error interceptor. Okay. So that is the basic setup for this. Now we actually need to return a DO object here. So down here, we just say return DO. And that is the setup for our client. This client will allow you to retrieve data from the YouTube API. Okay. So now let's actually set up the API call to get the playlist. So we already have the client. So let's create a new file here. I'm going to call it video.dart. This will be for retrieving a list of videos based on a playlist ID. Okay, so down here, I'm going to create a new function. So for now, let's say get YouTube, I guess videos is fine. And then we want to pass in a DO client instance. So we can say DO client. Okay, and let's import DO here. So I already know the API for this YouTube backend that I have, that I created in the Google Cloud. So I'm not going to show you that API key, but I'm going to create a new file. So I'm going to create a new file down here, and I like to call it secrets.json. So I'm going to make it so I'm storing the API key in the app, which is not that secure, but it's more secure than pushing the API key to GitHub, which you definitely should not be doing. So in here, I like to just create a JSON object and just name it API key. And then you want to create the API key that was created when you set up your Google Cloud backend for YouTube. So I'm going to skip over this part so you can't see it. Okay, so that's done. So down here, for now, I only have one API function. So I'm just going to get the key inside of this function. So down here, I'm going to say final JSON string equals, and then I'm going to say root bundle. So this gets the JSON string from the root bundle object dot. And then since the API key is a string, I'm going to say load string. And then I want to load it from a file, right? So load string, and then you pass in the actual path to that file. So the file is secrets.json. If you put the file somewhere else, then you might have like assets / like that, but I stored it in the root directory here. So we have this here. Oh yeah, and before I keep going with this, I need to add that file to the pub spec. Okay, so if we go to the pub spec here, here are the current assets. We have our logo, and down here, I'm going to add the secrets.json file. Very important. If you forget the step here, then you will get an error. So definitely don't forget the step here, or else it would not work. Okay, so let's close this. So here we theoretically have our string from the JSON file. So we need to actually decode that JSON string. So down here, I'm going to say final, and let's just call it, I don't know, data equals. So we could say JSON. Okay, and then we could say dot decode. So we're decoding a JSON string into a actual map here. Okay, so you see decode. So we're assuming that this is a map based on the file that we have. Okay, so pass in the JSON string here, like so, and we get an error about a feature. So this needs to be awaited here. Okay, and add our async. So now to get the key, I could say string API key equals, this is a map, so I want to take the API key from that map. So we called it API underscore key. And now actually going to call that API method. So we could say client dot, we have get. So you could do all your get and post and all that here too. So post, etc. So get. Now we want to pass the path to that playlist call here. So we already have this as the base URL. So now let's just copy this part and paste it into here, in quotes. So that's one thing, right? So let's go over here. So we have get. So we have the path here. So now to actually make this call succeed, we need to pass in a few query parameters here. So comma, and then I'll say query parameters. And this will be a map of data here. So the first thing you need to put into here is the key, because it expects a key. And this should be in quotes here, okay? And then we want to pass in our API key here. So we also have playlist ID, right? So let's go down here and say playlist. Make sure you spell these right. So I'm just going to copy this here. And then, as I mentioned before, the playlist ID is this value here. So let's go back and paste that here. And we also said that the part is going to be a snippet. Okay, so down here we have part. So I think this is all I want to do for now. And this returns a future response. So we're going to return this from the function. So return, and I'm missing something here, I think. Oh yeah, missing the comma here. And let's add our return type here. Okay, that was a lot of work, but now we have our client set up and our call to get YouTube videos from a specific playlist. And as we add more functions, we'll need to restructure how this is done too. But for one API call, this is okay for now. So as I talked about in the previous videos, we are using a layered architecture. So the bottom layer is the data. So now we can work our way up the chain. So what calls this function? It'll be the repository. So currently we're calling the Firebase API function here, but now we actually want to get the videos from the YouTube API instead. So now we want to refactor the repository here. So let's get rid of this part here. So what API call do we actually want to do here? We want to do await and get YouTube videos. Okay. And we want to pass in a client, but we don't have one yet. So let's go up here and I'm going to create a new instance of do. So let's do do. And down here, I'm going to create a constructor and we will initialize our do inside of the constructor here. So we'll say do equals client. Okay. And that client is this here. So let's import do here. And you'll see that we get an error right here. So you have two options here. One is you can make this nullable. And the second option that I like better is to use the keyword late here, because I know for sure that I will be initializing the DO instance in the constructor here. So this is one of the very few times where I think the late keyword is pretty helpful. Okay, so now we can pass in DO here. Okay, and now we actually want to return this too. So this is a different type than before. Before we return data based on Firebase, but now we're not using Firebase. So this query document snapshot doesn't really make sense now. So what does this return? This returns a feature response dynamic. So up here, let's just return a feature response. And you can see that's a lot cleaner than what we had before. So this is a good example of how to change your backend and why the layered architecture makes it so you don't have to change that much code. Okay, so we're returning a feature response. So let's work our way back up the layers. And now we go to the service. So the service calls that repository function. And what we had before here doesn't really make sense because there's no snapshots. So let's get rid of this entire block here. We'll do something similar, but for now, let's comment it out. So we're still calling this same function, but let's call this response here. So response, because this is a feature response. What are we going to return from this? We're going to return the same list of videos. So the return type from the service will be the same, but down here, let's do return. So I know that I want to return a list of videos. So I'm going to say list of video. Then I'm going to say dot from, then parentheses. So this will create a list of videos from whatever we put inside here. Okay. So like we did before, we're going to create a map here. So we're going to say parentheses response dot data. So that's a normal field here. So response dot data. Actually, let's see what this looks like first. So before I go down this road, let's just return a empty array first. And let's reload. Okay, so this is the layout of how the logger formats API data. So this is, if you go to the client here, these lines here are these loggers. So logger.d here. And you can see for sure up here. So let's go up here. This is the response interceptor. So if you go over this, that's this line here. So pretty useful library. So down here, this is the data that we get back from the API. So you can see our snippet block here. This is what we care about the most here. So snippet, you see we have publish stat, channel ID, title, description, etc. And then we have thumbnails, medium, high, standard, etc. Title, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So before we get going with that, I want to change the model that we currently have to in our app. So we have a video model, but now we don't have these fields here. We have different fields. So let's go up here. So look at each video here. So we have title, description. So let's put title here, title. And I want to add a couple more things. I want to add final, string, thumbnail, and I want to add the published at. So published date. Okay. Instead of just having a normal constructor here, I'm going to create a named constructor so it's more obvious what is happening. So we could use this, but instead, and we'll say video dot, let's call it from JSON. And then we'll pass in that JSON object. So we'll pass in a map of string dynamic, and then we'll call it JSON. So this map string dynamic is almost always what you use for the API response, because you always see a string but you never know what this other data is. It could be a string, it could be an int. Okay, you see a few different errors here. Let's go over this one. All final variables must be initialized. So now we're not just passing in the actual data. So now these cannot be final. So let's get rid of the final here. Final. And down here, I'm going to assign these based on the JSON field. So we'll say title equals JSON. We're going to be passing in just the video objects themselves. So it'll be title here. So we'll say JSON, and then we'll get the title from the object. So title, and let's import this. And down here, we'll say description equals JSON. Make sure these names are right, or else you won't get the data back that you expect. And then we'll say published date equals JSON. So that's published at here. Oops. Okay. And for thumbnail equals JSON thumbnails. Okay, and you see we have an error here still. So these are non-nullable fields too, right? So these now have to be nullable. So question mark, boom, boom. And now the error is gone. Okay, I know that was a bit of work, but that is a one-time thing for your app. Now we can go back to the service here, and instead of returning just an empty array, like we had before, let's say return list video dot from. Okay, and instead of here, we want to take the data from the response. So we'll say parentheses response dot data. And I put it in parentheses because I want to map it from the JSON data. Response.data is all of this stuff here, right? But I only want to have the items, right? So this is an array of items, okay? So let's get this array here. So items. And now I want to map these to a video model. So I can say dot map, and we could just call it JSON. So each of these will be this field here, down here. And now I want to return the mapped models. Okay, so now we'll say video dot from JSON as we had in our model file. And now I want to pass in, let's look into our items here. So now we have an array of items, and each video, the data is part of the snippet key here. So now we need to pass in JSON bracket snippet. So this says to first get the item array here and map each item in that array to a video from the snippet object here. Okay, because each item has a snippet, right? So take each snippet from each item in the items array and map it to a video model and return that list of videos that we create here from this fetch videos function. Okay, I know that was a lot. So let's save here. But I hope this makes sense. If any of your keys from the backend change, or you want to change how you structure your data, then this stuff will change here too. Let's put this on a different line so it looks better. Okay, there we go. And the cool thing about our current layered architecture is that to change the entire backend and API, we only have to change 3 of the 5 layers that we have. So we have the UI layer, the controller/state layer, service, repository, and the API layer. So this is the 3rd layer that we changed here, the service. So we never had to change anything inside of the state controller here. So this is all the same here. And we haven't had to touch any of the API or UI code, yet. But as you can see here, we get an error. And that's only because we changed the model itself, not because we changed the API. So if you go to our video page here, and we change this from name to title, and this is nullable now too, right? So we need to say, okay, if this is null, then we just put no title here. Okay, so let's reload and see what happens now. See, so now we have a list of 29 videos, like so. But as you can see, we only have 5 results here. And that's because of a field that we haven't set in the API yet. So let's go back to the client, or actually, let's go back to the video here. And there's another field that we can set. If you look in the API here, you see we have max results. So let's put this in here. So quote max results. Now let's set this to something high, like 50 or something. And now reload. Now you can see we have this here. So now if we scroll up, now we have all of our videos here. Okay. And as you can see here, it also puts the private videos here. I'll show you why this can be a problem. So now let's go back to our video page. And I'm going to be adding more to each video item here. So I want to break this out into its own file. So for each card here, let's put it into a separate file. So in the view folder, let's create a new file. I will call it video list tile.dart. So let's create a new widget here. It'll be a stateless widget. So we'll do stateless widget. Let's call it video list tile. And I want to pass in the video to this class. So before that, we'll create this in a second. Let's do this dot video, I guess. Video. And up here, we'll have our final video. Okay, so we're passing that in here. And let's go back to our video page. We want to copy this card to this new file. So down here, we'll copy, I guess we'll just copy the entire card here. So let's copy the card. And then we'll put it to this here, like so. Okay, and back here in the video page, we'll just return the video list tile at that index. So we'll say video list at that index. So that cleans up this file a lot. So no matter how complex we make these cards, this widget won't change very much. So let's go back to our tile here, and now we will create a more interesting UI for each of the videos. So first we have our video here, right? So let's go down here and we'll say video.title. So video.title. Let's reload and see if everything still works okay. Yes, we're still good. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get rid of the card. I have a different idea for each item now. So let's do this and this. Okay, that's fine. So for the container here, let's do colors dot white. Okay, let's add in some margin here. So margin, I want each card to have a margin at the bottom only. So let's do margin. Let's do edge. Insets all, and let's say 16 at the bottom. So actually not all. Let's do dot. I think it's dot only, and then bottom 16. Okay, that looks better. And now instead of just having a text here, let's do a column. So let's do column, children, and then we'll put the text into here. And now let's add a thumbnail image above the text here. So up here, we'll do image dot network because it's a URL from the JSON. So .network, and then we'll pass in the video dot thumbnail here. Okay. And this can be null. So we'll put that as a placeholder. So we'll say if this is null, then we'll just add this. Let's restart. It's showing in every single model, which means that I made a mistake with the thumbnail key here. So let's go back to the model. Ah, you see here? Yeah. Spelling errors. Don't misspell your JSON keys. Okay, so we start. Nope, still getting it. Let's go back up here. Ah, okay, so thumbnails. So instead of the thumbnails object, there's other objects too. So let's go back to the video model. And you see we have thumbnails, default, medium, etc. So we can't just say thumbnail or thumbnails. We have to say thumbnails. And then let's point to the max res just because. So let's say max, you can see it down here, max res. Max res. And then we also need the URL. So then we'll say URL. So be sure that you are aware of how your data is structured and you write your code based on the structure of the data, like so. Okay, so let's save, restart. And you see that we have another error here. So this one I'm actually not surprised by because of the private video that we had. So we have a private video, and if you look up here, as you can see here, the thumbnail object itself is just an empty object here. So now we need to add some code for this use case here. So if the thumbnails are always empty, then we want to do something else instead. So let's put a condition here. Let's say if this part is empty. So there's a very easy way to check to see if it's empty or not. You could say dot is not empty. Okay. And then we want to say, okay, if it's not empty, let's just do this, right? If they don't exist, then there's some more code that we need to write for that. If it's not empty, then do this. Else, if it is empty, we will put that placeholder here. Okay, so let's go back to, I forgot where that was. Page. So now we can copy this and put this inside of the video model. Okay, so if it's empty, then we'll just show a picture of that dog there. And let's get rid of this line here now. And we should be able to go back to our list tile and not check this. We can assume that this is always not null. So let's put that in here, save. And boom. So now if you go down here to where our private video was, you should see the picture of a dog somewhere. There we go. So now that's the bulk of what this video is about. Let's make this look a lot better than it does now. Let's try to add some flair to make this look a little bit more professional. So in the list tile here, the first thing I want to do is remove most of this padding here. So let's do edge insets 1. I want to have a little white border around each video object. So save and reload. Okay, so I kind of like how that looks around here. And now since we have a title in the thumbnails, I don't actually want to show a title here. Let's get rid of this text here, and instead, I'm going to create a row of widgets because I want to have a button to view the video because this is not the actual video here. And I want to have an option to kind of star the video and make it a favorite. we're not going to actually add that functionality now, but we're just going to add the UI for it. So down here, I'm going to say row, and then children. Let's add a text button first. So text button, and then for the on press, let's leave it as an empty function for now. We'll have the child be a text. So we'll say text, and then let's call it view. And then in the row on the right side, I want to have a button. So it should probably be an icon button. So we'll say icon button. On press will be empty string or empty function. I mean, let's do it down here. And we'll say the icon will be, has to be an icon widget. So like this, and then you pass in whatever icon you want here. So icons, we'll do like a star. Let's do a star. That should not be here. There we go. So in here, we'll have icons dot, let's do star border. And let's make this, I want this to be blue too. So let's do colors dot blue. Okay, so let's go back up here. Let's add some styling to this. So we'll do style, text style. Let's add in some font size here. Let's make it like, I don't know, 18. The color is already blue, but we'll say colors dot blue anyways. And let's make it a bit bold too. So down here we can say font weight, and then you say font weight dot bold. And so that will take care of the text on the left. So in order to make this how I want it to look, I want the view to be on the left and the star to be on the right side. So up here, we'll change some of the alignment here. So we'll say main axis alignment, so it'll align on this axis here. So I want this to be main axis alignment dot space between. So it'll put space between each widget in the row, as much space as it can put. So let's restart or reload. So that looks a lot better already. Let's put a container around the row because I want to add some color here too. So let's do container, and this will be child, and then put it around the row here. Okay. And instead of this container, let's do some color. So color dot or colors dot black. So this will make the background black here. And let's add some padding too. So for the padding, let's do all. Actually, not all, because I want it on the left and right side. So let's do dot symmetric, and then we'll say horizontal axis only. And then let's do 24, I guess. Okay, reload. Okay. Yeah, I like how this looks now. So yeah, I think that's all I want to do for this video. We learned how to use the API to fetch a playlist on a channel. We learned how to transition an API call from Firebase to some other service, to a regular REST API using Dio. And we also learned how to change the model to reflect the JSON data that we receive in the new API call. And we also learned how to make the UI and the list of videos look a lot better. Like this looks more like an actual app that you might use. So in the next video, we'll add a new screen that actually has the video playback, so you can actually view the video and read more information about that video. So yeah, stay tuned for the next video. Happy coding. Bye.